That is truly one of the challenges for ones, is that they are seen as hard. They are seen as critical because their inner critic is so strong. They're applying it to themselves first, but they set such a high standard for other people. And because they are thinking oriented, thinking and action oriented, feeling comes third for typical ones. So they're not going to present as these warm, cuddly people. The truth is, once you get past that sort of the defense and the need to for perfection, ones can be some of your strongest allies.
This season on the Living Out Love podcast, we are focusing on you, who you are, what motivates you, what you're here to contribute, and how you can expand. We'll be utilizing my leadership skills and spiritual connection, diving deep into the Enneagram and astrology. Listen every week to become intimately aware of yourself. Only then can you heal and grow. Let's get to work, loves. Hello, loves. Welcome to the Living Out Love podcast. I'm Amy Hageman. I am joined by Stephanie and Dana Foy this week. They happen to be my parents. They're also certified integrative Enneagram facilitators. And this is the first of 9 episodes where we are going to be diving deep into each number. They will likely not be short episodes, but I have 4 kind of overarching goals for these deep dive episodes. I want to give all of us the chance to fall in love or experience love for whichever number it is we're talking about. But I also want us to understand that those numbers are human. What is it that they struggle with? Where can we have empathy for them? And then how can we help the numbers? What is it that they could do to be their best selves? And then for those of us that are in a relationship with them, what is it that we can do to be supportive and honor who they are in the world? So I've asked a lot. Okay, so who are ones? What's an Enneagram 1?
Are you going to give you a list or describe it?
Just whatever jumps out.
Okay, so let me name some people because I think it's easier for people to identify a type if they can visualize someone they know that exhibits type 1 behavior. So in actors, famous actors, Emma Watson, who was Hermione Granger in Harry Potter, is thought of as being a 1. And I'm not surprised. I mean, I witnessed her as Hermione Granger, and I've witnessed her in interviews and things. So I think, she may have been portraying herself a little bit as Hermione Granger. I really do believe that. Matt Damon is a type 1. And he's a fabulous actor, and I've heard interviews with him, and he's very precise in preparing his role. So that Matt Damon, okay. A famous athlete, Venus Williams, is thought of as being a type 1. Now, there's a person who works really hard to have set a high standard of her appearance, the way she talks to announcers when she's interviewed, obviously her style of play, and her ability to get better. I mean, she's fallen down and gotten up, Just that's an example of type 1. And notable, I'll call them politicians, Michelle Obama is assumed to be a type 1. And I think she's one of the most impactful first ladies in my lifetime when I think about one. I think she really exhibited how to do many, many things at a high standard. So what I read about her was she was really kind of uncomfortable taking on that role. But she went to work at it, figured out who she was, and she did it at a high standard. Mm-hmm. She had a good example for other people. Eleanor Roosevelt is one from the past. Her story later. Queen Elizabeth II is thought of being a type 1. I think it was a rough ride through the royal family for 70 years when she was the queen. But, they overcame, they worked hard, and you think about it, I don't think anybody who could have pulled it off any better. Okay, so in terms of my describing a type 1, I'm gonna go to 2 other people that I'm familiar with, and I hope they're not too old for the audience we have here. I'm 67, so Amy, I'm not going to reveal your age, but you're 30 years younger than I am. So I just don't know the age range. But Martha Stewart is thought of being a type 1, and Steve Jobs is thought of being a type 1. So when I think of a type 1, they are labeled as strict perfectionists. So what I'm going to describe is not someone who is a fully redeemed type one. You know, there's according to Richard Reward, we start out as unredeemed in our type, and then we become aware that we don't have to be that way, and we take steps to get better and better and improve ourselves. So I'm going to talk more about a moderate type one, and I want to use Martha Stewart because I think people know who she is, and Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is type one. So type ones are the hardest working, most dedicated of all the type ones. They're willing to go far above and beyond what's willing with the other ones to reach whatever level of perfection they would like to do. So can you imagine a car with that Apple CarPlay now? I won't buy a car with that Apple CarPlay. That was a long journey for Steve Jobs. He had a vision. He just kept telling these guys, fix it, make it do this, make it do this.
Well, I want to pause real quick because you've said a lot already. Okay. So you said ones are the hardest working, and I would have guessed that would have been a 3 or an 8. I just want to make sure I heard you right on that one.
Yeah, you did, because I think that the ones, they are the different. One of the differences between a 1 and a 3 is 3s are very physical. They're very active. They're very vocal. They are performers. The ones, they are about getting things done. So a lot of their work takes place internally. Their thoughts, what they need to do, how to make things better. So there's a lot of pressure on themselves to make themselves perfect first. And then they transfer that to the team. So me saying that, I'm gonna go. I'm just kind of jumping around here, but I think it's a time that I could tell you what the worldview is. I'm going to read this to you. The worldview of a 1 is the world isn't perfect, and I can work towards improving it and improving myself. I must make the world a better place. That is their worldview. They feel driven, to make things better, and it starts with them. And their motivation is to be good and right. They have a strong conscience, and a good sense of discernment of what's right and what's wrong. And it's their focus of attention. They go about the world distinguishing between what's right and wrong, good and bad, correct and incorrect, and avoiding mistakes. And following rules and standards is very important. That's one way that you can make things perfect, if you teach people rules and standards to adhere to. And their idealized self-image is that they are good, they are right, and they're perfect. So that's, a quick. I've said a lot. Do you have a question? Or Stephanie, do you have something you want to say?
Well, I think we'll get more into the shadow side of ones, but what ones bring to groups is that high degree of integrity and that setting high standards for others, so that one of the questions before you said was, what's the difference between 1 and 3 and 8? So 3s, because they're results driven, they get to good enough and they move on. 1s get to good enough and they go, oh, I got 20% more to do. So they're going to push beyond where a 3 would stop, and 3 would be like, okay, fine, whatever.
Okay, I want to interrupt my wife and talk real quick before I forget this, because I'm a 9 and I get distracted. So we are on a team together, and we have a 1. And we started out years ago with some processes, and it was good enough. But I swear, after every time we get together, which is twice a month, they break down what happened today. How can we make this better? And it's continually to get better and better. We have some 3s and things are good enough, but because we have this 1, it gets smoother and more efficient. And one of the compliments we get from the volunteers that join us is just how slick it is. People show up, they know what to do, they go right to work, they get it done, and they don't realize the work that happened before they got there. And then they can come another time and realize something has changed. We're doing something a little bit different. And they'll announce we're doing this differently because, and it is an incremental improvement over what we did the week before. So that's what the 1s bring is efficiency, and it's kind of quiet. You don't know they're doing it, but it's happening. Now I'll be quiet, Stephanie. I interrupted.
So actually, it's the 3 that brings the efficiency. It's the 1 that brings the standard, and the 3 figures out how to implement it. That's how those
Okay.
2 things
That's
work
what I was going to
together.
say. The 3 and the 1 probably are a powerhouse.
Yeah. And then the 8, so you ask about 8. So 8s, you are correct in that they're high energy people and they're action oriented, which is where you would think about like 1s and 3s.
Yeah.
But they don't have the same set of standards that a 1 has.
Okay.
So they're also not going to do that 110 or 120% that a 1 will do in order to make things exactly right. So they're going to get to a place where they get their own degree of satisfaction at 8 is, and then that's good enough for them. Because remember, 8s are active controllers. So as long as they can be in control of the situation, then life's good. So that's just a distinction between that 1, 3, 8 energy that you were kind of pointing out to.
So as a 2, I'm listening to this description and it sounds great, but I'm like, where's the warmth? Like, it doesn't feel very warm to me. Which not all people have to be warm, but that's usually something that I'm solving for. So that's one, I'm just making a note of that, not something to be fixed. But
so that is truly one of the challenges for 1s is that they are seen as hard. They are seen as critical because their inner critic is so strong. They're applying it to themselves first, but they set such a high standard for other people. And because they are thinking oriented, thinking and action oriented, feeling comes third for typical 1s. So they're not going to present as these warm, cuddly people. The truth is, once you get past that sort of the defense and the need to for perfection, 1s can be some of your strongest allies because because they have such a focus on goodness. They tend to see the goodness in others. They also see the flaws in others because they want everybody to be perfect. But once you get to a place where the 1 knows you and you know the 1, they can just be fabulous. They are loyal. They are supportive. But when you're setting a standard, they're not going to tolerate bad behavior. They're not going to tolerate, stuff like that. But so they can just be great people once you kind of get to know them. In fact, it's interesting. Yesterday, a person that was recently in our Enneagram class said, "Oh my gosh," she said, "I've always liked and respected this certain person, but," she said, "I really couldn't see what everybody thought was so fabulous about them." She said, "I knew that they did a lot and they were productive." And she said, "But truthfully, I didn't get it." She said, "But when I took the class," she said, "I could totally have a newfound respect and admiration for this person who is a 1 and for what they bring." She said, "It has totally changed my perspective on that person."
And I think for me, I'm searching for something that I can like connect to because
Yes.
So one of the things I thought while Dana was listing the people is I was thinking, oh, Eleanor Roosevelt, Emma Watson, they both kind of rewrote the rules. Eleanor, to my understanding, was one of the first ladies to really make that a leadership position. Right. She kind of rewrote the book on that. Emma Watson started her own organization. In fact, I think, come to think, Matt Damon, I think he and Ben Affleck started their own production company because they wanted to rewrite the rules on what the crew got paid.
Right.
So, and then I was thinking, Martha Stewart and Steve Jobs. I mean, I can't think of a more perfectionistic examples than that. And I was in a cell phone retailer when the iPhone first came out, meaning I was working there. And we had all heard that story that when they were delivering the prototypes to Steve Jobs of the iPhone, that they thought, this is it. This is the final version. Here you go. This is great. And it worked. and he had like a fish aquarium in his office, and he threw the phone into the aquarium and air bubbles started coming out of it. And he said, there's too much space in there. You need to make it tighter. Like, here it was. They thought they delivered this final thing, and his way of testing it was to throw it in a fish tank, which I remember hearing that story and thinking, that's a little off. That's a little bit much for me. Like maybe a bit of a tyrant is kind of what I thought. But yet he totally raised the bar. Every other phone company either changed or went bankrupt after that.
Well, yeah. And you think about what we were using before we had the iPhone and then what came after it. We had those BlackBerry things. That was just cumbersome and funky. Anyway, yes. So they do set high standards. Now, what you were talking about in terms of
innovative, that's the word I was trying to get to.
So where they tend to innovate is one, if they lean into their floor, which is a whole nother conversation, but because they value principles and integrity and order, they're going to look for places where that does not exist. So Eleanor Roosevelt, as far as I could see, she felt like there were things in society that were out of integrity for who America said we were. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so what she looked to do was to apply what she believed were American principles and American integrity to say, we've got to do better. We as a society have to do better. We're better than this. Same thing, I would say, in some cases, you hear about Michelle Obama in terms of what she was looking to do was hold America to the standard that we say we are, be in integrity with our own principles.
Yeah, she had to be perfect.
Yeah, well, that's a whole nother thing.
It is and it isn't. I don't think, even though I think the country was like ready-ish for a person of color to be the president, I think the fact that she is a perfectionist helped.
Probably, yes.
You know, I mean, somebody that was just warm and was a person of color wouldn't have been enough for most Americans.
No.
So it had to be somebody with, okay, that's getting me there. Now I'm like, oh, now I can fall in love.
Yeah, those very high ideals, those very high standards that they bring to something that feels important to them.
Yeah.
It's like, you know.
Okay, so go ahead.
And they're going to continue to hold themselves up as like, you know, I think about like they're the point of the spear. They're willing to go first. They're willing to, you know, hold themselves up as the example and do that, no matter how painful it is.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have experienced around some ones, and I've often read about them, is that they are so focused on getting things done, and that they're not aware that they have a kind of a blunt or harsh delivery to people that are real sensitive. And I'm a 9, so I have a 1 wing, and I've experienced this when my 1 shows up. I'm trying to get things done, even when I'm trying to dial back the intensity of my voice and the look on my face, and I can't do it. It comes out and it lands hard. So I just don't think that many times they're aware. Like Steve Jobs probably wasn't aware that could have hurt somebody's feelings. He just, fix this. I'm gonna throw it in the fish tank and show you that it's not ready yet. And maybe somebody later got their feelings had to tell them. So I just don't think they're aware of that.
I'm curious, is it possible that they're aware, but they're willing for people to be hurt in order to get to perfection? Screw your feelings. Let me get this right.
Well, as in all numbers, people have various ways of demonstrating their numbers. Yeah. You may have, like, I'm a 9, but I have a strong 1 wing, and my 2 wings not that strong. So it just varies from person to person. So I'm kind of talking more about, in my mind, someone that's kind of a moderate, semi-redeemed person.
Okay. And you said 2 wing. I think you said that because the 1 wing is a 2.
Okay, I get myself confused.
You meant your 8.
I'm talking about me as a 9. I'm a 9, so I have
so it's the 8 and the 1.
8 and 1. So I my 1's got me. So
gotcha. I feel that. So I just want to, go over everything that I heard you say so that you can add anything else if I'm not remembering right. So the ones strive for perfectionism. They're really critical, which can be positive or negative, primarily on themselves. They have a very clear sense of what's right, what's wrong, their moral value, and they're very committed to living that out. So if something's not up to snuff per se, then they're committed to changing it. That's my understanding of the one. What am I missing anything?
You got that. So we're going to talk about social style. If there's something that a one wants, the way they get that is they're compliant. They follow rules. They set standards. They behave well. They lead. They try to get what they want by being good, by being productive and doing things right. And when things don't go well, competency comes into play. They fix it. They analyze what was wrong, how they can make it better. So they make that thing compliant. So that's how they find their way in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So on the other side, ones are triggered when they feel like other people don't comply, and so they can be seen as harsh or critical. They can be seen as impatient because they feel like, here's the standard, you should meet it, and so they can be challenging for people who have a hard time with follow through, because ones are going to follow through to the nth degree. So people who don't follow through are likely to get on their last nerve, and they can be seen as self-righteous and stubborn because they've got this high standard. So it's like every number, your high side, it's like a double-edged sword. It's like what's good for you can also be bad for you. So good for them, high standards, bad for them, high standards. So it's just how they're carried out and how they enact with others. So, but I would say the biggest challenge for ones is to handle their own inner critic, because that's the strongest voice. And so while others are going to have a different whatever, but their inner critic is so strong that in some cases, some ones have told me, oh yeah, 90% of the thoughts I have in my head are how I could have, should have been doing something better. I should have done that better. I should have done that quicker, whatever. So that's a hard place to be, in my opinion.
As a 2, I feel like I have that on my one wing. I totally relate to the constant, and I'll catch myself in the coulda, woulda, shoulda, and I'll catch it and think, that's not even true. Like I'll feel like I should have done something on some information I didn't even have at the time. Like it's not even possible that I could have done it different, but my mind is still telling me. So I'm assuming that ones have that also, where not only are they, nothing's ever enough, but it's probably so patterned in them that it might not even be based in reality. It could just never be enough.
That's right. Exactly. Because the world is never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so for the ones, they're always striving for perfection in themselves, in other people, and in the world. So as long as it's not perfect, they've got work to do. So on the opposite side, the idea that we can support ones in is to know that there is perfection in my spiritual language. It would say the universe is perfect. This was everything is in divine order. And if we can just move into our higher self, our higher essence, we can understand that there's perfection in all things. So that's a place that we can support ones, is to sort of soften some of that critic and allow for there's divine order. There's perfection in all things.
It's funny that you said soften, because earlier I said the word warmth, and we haven't talked about this specifically, but based on the way you've described one so far, it feels to me like ones are more thinking and doing rather than feeling.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I said. They're a 1, 2, they're 1, 2, 3 punches, think, do, feel, last. Not they're not high on the feeling sensitivity. So yeah, but that sort of gets us into what can they, if you are looking for movement, it's one, how do we integrate the high side of one, the virtues of goodness, leaning into those values, but in a softer way that says, I can be serene, I can be peaceful, I can know that there's divine order and perfection in all things and let it play out. Because sometimes we know that perfection is on the way, but it's just in here yet. So the ones are like, got to make it perfect right now. So that's one thing for the ones, but also to look at their wings, which is 9 and 2. And
9 and 1.
No,
9 and 2. Yes, sorry.
As a wing. So their wings are 9 and 1. So 9s, they're the adaptive peacemakers. So they're going to seek other people's points of view. So you can see where if a 1 truly engages in looking at other people's points of view, that's going to soften their stance. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Because as you see, oh, these are other ways of looking at this. This, my way might not be the exact perfect way. There may be other points of view that would shine a light on this. And then the other side, the 2, as you know, they're going to be focused on other people's needs. So that's a different sort of focus than focusing on a strict ideal or perfection or a standard. Does that make sense? So it's 2 is a much more emotional place. 9 is a more emotional place. So either of those places, if they lean into either wing, that perceived harshness of a 1 is going to be softened.
Okay. My sense as a 2, so I can get lost in what I perceive to be the needs of others.
Yes.
Thinking about the 1, I'm thinking they probably have a lot of self-trust. Even though they're always pushing themselves to be better, there's probably an element of them that believes in their ability to make things happen in a way that, okay.
So, because one of the fears that they have is to be wrong or imperfect or bad.
Okay.
So while that's a fear that they have, they're going to overcompensate by being sure that they can be right, that they can be good. And they typically won't put themselves in a situation where they might not have that capacity.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. Well, darn. I was hoping that there'd be this element of I am who I am. I trust myself, because that's something for me as a 2. I'm like, gosh, that's admirable,
Yes.
Well,
yes.
What must that be like?
I've been in situations with a couple of 1s, and there was a conversation happening, a story about something or something not going well, and in a situation where I would be expressing emotions, feeling something, but what I witnessed was them kind of stepping back and just watching. And I think what they were doing was just processing what was happening and how it could have been made better. What could I have done wrong with this? And also what 1s, because they have such a sense of right and wrong, they have a tight control over themselves and their emotions. They don't want to act out and be seen as being inappropriate. So a lot of times they'll maybe be experiencing internal emotion, but they're just not letting you see it. And they may not have totally processed it yet. So they're there. They just express them differently than us.
And
How I do it anyway.
And you are correct. The positive side is once they figure it out, like Dana said, like they stand back and watch. And then when they are clear that they have a path forward to make things better and they're clear about that, absolutely. They will stand in their own power and show up and be like, this is the way you get things done. We see a lot of 1s in roles that put them related to quality control, related to messaging. How do we deliver this message? So that it's you wouldn't think about a one being in communication, but the truth is they want to be exacting. They want to be sure that we're delivering the right message, or they want to be sure that the quality of this corporation or these products, that's where a one is going to naturally find themselves. I mean, that's kind of what we said about Steve Jobs and Martha Stewart. I mean, Martha Stewart for having everything just so, just like, So yeah. So once they are clear that they have a path forward and that they see how to get to, something of a higher standard, yes, they will be very confident in their actions and how they work with others and their expectations of other people.
And Martha ones may have worked a long time behind the scenes in practice and had many iterations before they reveal what they're going to teach you.
Oh, that's true. She makes it look easy.
Yeah, but you don't know how hard she worked on it. Many times, like Venus Williams, how hard did she have to work to keep herself in shape and learn all the shots and things? A lot of practice. They make it look easy, but I assure you, a lot of work will happen behind the scenes. I mean, they're just as human as the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because when you mentioned communication, I was kind of like, huh? But then back to some of the other examples you guys gave, Michelle Obama was known being very great, precise, articulate communicator. And then who's the Emma Watson also. She's when she's been communicating about her films, but also about her organization, she's very precise, and that makes sense, but I never would have put that together. That's interesting. So we started to get into the wings a little bit, and then I think I took us off track. So you were saying with the 9 seeking input from others, and the 9 and 2s are both feelers, and that can soften them. So was there anything else you wanted to say about how and when to utilize the wings?
So the 9 wing can make it easier for them to sort of suspend judgment. Because remember, 9s are peacemakers. So they're gonna, they want to include everybody. They want everybody to be, at peace. That's what they're seeking. So if you think about a 1, it's like, okay, suspending judgment, suspending that critic in order to be more accepting of other people and wherever they are. Also, because 9s, they have that moniker of being the meditating elephant. They tend to, and they want to be sort of unscathed by life. So that means they, by nature, have sort of what I would think of as a softer energy, a kind of a slower energy than you might think about a hard driving 1. So to lean into a 9 is going to be a way for a 1 to soften and relax and sort of loosen up in terms of some of their strict boundaries. So that's where a 9 can, support the 1, is to lean into that 9 energy. And then the 2 energy, you'll jive with this, is to balance that task orientation with a people orientation. And so tempering their standards with their concern for people. So balancing that is a place where a 1 can lean into that 2. And
the 2 can also help the 1 with their inner critic. If they can connect with other emotions than the 1 to get this thing done and get it perfectly, they can soften up on themselves, and the inner critic can be perceived as not being quite as harsh.
Also, leaning into the 2 gives the 1 the opening to be more emotionally available. Is that because 2s, we know, people talk about 2s wearing their emotions on their sleeves, they're emotionally available. So a 1 who doesn't seem like they're as emotionally available, they can lean towards 2, and that's going to give them that feeling, that word that you've been looking for, warmth. It's going to make them feel more warm and more affectionate.
Yeah, I think when I think about like Michelle Obama, I think she's probably comfortable in her 2 wing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say if you look at Michelle, she was pretty integrated in that she was comfortable in her 2 wing, but she was also in some ways a peacemaker. She would want to include other people, but at the core, she was still holding to a high degree of principle and integrity. So she was integrating those in a very, in my mind, healthy sort of way.
Yeah. Well, I like also the idea if one of the biggest burdens of the 1 is the inner critic, I like the idea that leaning towards the 2, the compassionate helper, or the 9 to suspend judgment could help heal the inner critic.
Yeah.
One of the things I keep coming back to this podcast season is how the universe is designed to help us heal. And so the 1 has that in either wing to some extent,
Exactly.
So that's just beautiful.
Well, so you want to move on to the lines because that's another opportunity for healing. So the lines for the 1 are 7 and 4. And 7 is what? The enthusiastic visionary. This is the playful number. These are the folks that are, they're spontaneous. They're exploring the world. They're playing. Now, do you see a 1 being playful? It's hard for them.
I see them being visionary, perhaps.
Right.
Playful, no.
Yeah. So, but if they can lean into that, now this is funny because you might think, 7 would be a stretch for them. And it kind of is a stretch, but not like the 4 is when we get there. So the 7 is that enthusiastic visionary. So, but it can release a lot of tension if the 1 can move into more exploration, more playfulness, more spontaneity.
Who has time for that?
Huh?
What kind of a 1 has time for that?
Yeah, well, but it's really good for them because it just, it does all kinds of good things. 1, it reduces their stress. It gives them another outlook on life. It can, again, soften that inner critic because you can't be too critical if you're on the way to spontaneity. If you're just doing the next thing and you're exploring, by its very nature, exploration says we're not going to be into perfection. Exploration says that's going to be messy along the way. So,
same thing with fun. I'm assuming you're not thinking about perfectionism when you're just having fun.
Yeah. Well, it would be very hard.
So, going to 7 and learning to have fun and being spontaneous can be a link to the stretch point to 4.
Right. So the stretch point of that 4 is that intense creative. So that whole, in order to be creative, you got to suspend perfection. You got to be willing to get a little messy. Yeah. You got to be willing to know that you're not going to get it perfectly the right thing. You're going to try some things. So creativity and perfectionism sort of like don't live in the same crucible. So moving into that intense creative moves ones into more self-expression. It can move them more into self-care, which self-care for a 1 is challenging because, there's always more to do. There's always something else to make perfect, to make right. So, that 4 energy can support them in that way. But that's and the reason that we call it a stretch is because it will stretch you. So it will cause you to be uncomfortable. It will cause you to get out of yourself. So you can imagine that would, that sort of intense creative energy would be counter to a 1.
So 4 is the stretch, and 7 is the release.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dad, is that kind of what you were going to say earlier? Is that if they move towards the 4, that will help them get to the 7? Or what were you going to say?
It's easy to go to the release.
Okay.
So, then there, I think if they can go to the 7 and learn to be spontaneous and have fun and lighten up, that could be a setup to release the tensions that the 1 feels in an inner critic, and to be perfect and sit with, like Stephanie said, what it takes to be intensely creative. When you're trying to create something new and you get frustrated because you're stuck, it could be easy just to toss, the cell phone in the fish tank and pick up your BlackBerry. But if you spend some time with 7, you can realize, okay, so I'll get there. It's supposed to be messy, and maybe you can hang with it. And it also could be a matter of self-discipline where I just stay with. Maybe I go away a little while and come back to it, but just to stay with it. So I think that's where Steve Jobs set himself apart. He was able to just be intensely creative with all the things he did. In fact, when he passed away, one of the concerns about Apple being successful was who's going to be the visionary for Apple now. Tim Cook, who took his place, he was more of an operations guy. And so that whole conversation about creativity in the 1 is very interesting to study. How did he do that? How did Steve do that? Part of it was by accessing the 7 in the wing and the 4 wing lines, he was able to create and maintain a very fluid, creative team. He kept pressing on them to be better. And he probably was intuitive enough to hire people that had a four, had that within them. So he didn't probably have to figure it all out. He just knew my team is capable of doing that. And his wings and his lines helped him be patient until they came up with it. I mean, he sent them back to the drawing board many, many times. So, we're all a work in progress. And I have seen someone soften up by going out and having fun, and be able to have more intimate relationships with me and others because they went somewhere and took some risk and had some fun. And then I've been with them when they talked about their fun, how they go from being, I'm going to talk about, their type 1 serious nature, to when talk about the fun they had, the creativity, they get a spark in their eye. And I just think it's something that maybe they unconsciously begin to use their wings because it becomes a practice and it makes them feel good.
I think it's interesting. I can see that the 4 is a stretch for the 1. For me, when I think about my release is easy for me to get to. It's like secondhand nature. But I think about a 1 going to a 7, that doesn't necessarily seem easy to me. But I guess for all numbers, but are the releases something that we're all naturally kind of ease into, or release is sometimes uncomfortable for people?
Okay, so I'm a 9, and my release point is 3, which is right action. And it's easy for me to do that. If I can make a list of things to do, and I can do these things, and so that is easy for me.
Okay, but it's something that you choose to step into more so probably than like your 1 wing. Maybe it's just more of a natural overlap.
Oh, wait a minute, I get confused about the wings and the lines. Okay,
so I'm so sorry, but
we're talking about the lines now. So the 3 line for me is easy because all I have to do is do something.
Okay,
I can step out of being a meditating elephant, thinking about doing something, ruminating about doing something, to actually doing something.
Okay,
anything. Now,
so the 7 line. Do you think that the 7 line is easy for 1s?
I think
not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No,
okay, so that's
I don't
what I was...
think so. I think it has to be conscious.
Okay.
For some folks, and Dad talked about when you started the beginning, that how Richard Rohr talks about the unredeemed and the redeemed ones. So in their higher side, 1s can move easily towards 7. The more they integrate, the more they work on themselves, they can see the value of that relaxation, of that release, of that spontaneity. They can see the value of it. Initially, if they're not, if they are in the growth part of one and they're in the early stages, the 7 can be a challenge. Now, what really can help a 7, help a 1, is to hang out with 7s, or to hang out with people who have access to 7, because that's going to encourage them and set a model for them. It's like all of us, when we can hang out with somebody who is one of our lines and see and let that be a model to us. It's like, oh, that's what that looks like. Oh, I can, I can't do that wholly, but I could do a little bit of that, or I can lean into that. So, so I think it has to be intentional, but it has to, your dad was saying it's easy for him to move into his 3. Well, I think he's learned that. That's been a growth thing.
Well, now that you bring it up, it wasn't easy at first.
Yeah.
I mean, I had, but I live with a 3. So here's my model. Here's my example. So then maybe that's why it was easier for me, because, that's how you do it. You just keep moving. Yeah. And, you just don't stop moving. So you get up out of the chair, and then when you sit down, you get rested, get up and move some more. So, but years ago when I first started working with the Enneagram, it was difficult for me to really stay active all day.
Well, I will say with the 1s and the 7s, it seems like they're both visionary in some way, and they're both doers.
Right.
So I can see how it's not maybe natural for a 1 to go to a 7, but I could see how that would be an easier slide than going to a 4, which is such a feeler.
Yes.
Right. Just in their body. That's like, if you ask me to go sit through a presentation that's just thinking all day, I mean, I can't. Yeah. I just can't do it because thinking is so repressed for me. So I could see how that would be the case. That's helpful.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty complete with the stretch and the release, the 7s and the 4 for 1s. But do you have anything you want to add for that?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, Dad, you started to talk earlier about their social style as being compliant. Is that what you said? I don't remember what you said their social style was, but
okay, compliant. They are big into showing up and behaving properly, which means being on time, being appropriately dressed, following rules, setting a high standard, just setting a good example. And then when things go awry, the way they fix things to acquire things they don't want is to be competent. They'll go through the one process of determining what needs to be fixed, what is the best way to fix it. So Enneagram says that they get what they want by being compliant and following rules, setting examples, and then when things go awry, they fix them, figure out ways to make things better.
Mm-hmm. You can also think about that 1s, whether it's rules, but they like rules, protocols, processes. They're going to be strong in all of those sorts of areas. I mean, I know a 1 in a professional standard that has a process map for every piece of his job. Like he's developed a map, a process structured map for everything that happens in his domain. So it's like, but then when something goes awry, it's like, oh, here's the problem in the process. So either that's where you fix it or you restructure the process. But so rules, protocols, processes, policies, all of those things are going to be strongly in the purview of a 1.
Societal norms. What's normal in society? Do the normal thing.
Yeah. As a 2, I can really get down with that, because if you have all the rules for me, I can just follow the rules and then you will like me. Done. I don't have to even figure it out.
Yeah.
Which sort of, I guess, leads, I mean, you touched on it earlier with 1s, they expect other people to also be perfect and also have this high standard. But what else should we know about interacting with ones socially or in any sort of relationship?
Okay, so the way a one loves you is by doing things for you. I have a one that the way she loves me is she knits, and she knits things for me, and she knits things for other people that she cares about, and she likes to do it perfect. I have seen her knitting something for somebody else and get way on down the road with it, and it'll be a boo boo, and just rip the whole thing apart, start all over. No frustration, no cussing, no throw it on the floor, stomping on it. Oh, this is not going to be good enough. I got to do. So I said, well, can't you just kind of do a little bit of this other thing and tag it on? Nobody will know. Only you'll know. Well, no, I can't do it. So when this person brings me these things, I'm aware of what a gift it is, the energy and the thought that was behind that. So that's how one, in my opinion, is going to express their love and affection. Stephanie, do you have any other thing to say about that? Or
the other thing I would say about being in relationship with ones is if they come across hard, like don't take it personally. It's not personal to you. It's their standard. And just know that what's underneath there is a higher ideal. So that's what I would say. Just like let water roll like a duck's back. Just try to not be defensive and try to just not take it personally if they come across as hard or critical or impatient. Just know that like with every style, every number, there's the downside. That's the downside of one. So just don't hook into it, because you could have your feelings hurt. You could be offended. You could be, or you could just say, oh, that's just, so-and-so being a one. And I need to value and appreciate the fact that they care so much about me, or they care so much about my organization, or they care so much about my team that they want to hold us all to a high standard. So switch into what you value about the one and just don't hang on to that other stuff.
I think if I hadn't known about the ones, if I hadn't had the Enneagram, I could easily see myself not appreciating the effort and the perfection and just thinking, oh, they just like to do it that way, or, oh, they're just high maintenance,
Right.
So I think having that understanding, like to Dad's story about the completely ripping up the knitting and starting over, I think in the past I have written things off as, oh, well, that's just what they like to do, rather than that's the effort that they're putting into the relationship. So for me, that's a helpful reframe.
Okay, so here's what I've also learned about the few number of ones that I am in a relationship with. Because they come across, or can be perceived to come across as hard, you can think that they don't need love and affection. That's something that they don't require. Well, that I can't be more wrong about that. The way you can love on a one is to love on them. Come up behind them, put your arm around them. Hey, how you doing? Boy, I love that thing you knitted for me. I wear it everywhere. I wear it tonight to keep my bald head cold, warm. In the winter when my head gets cold, so I wear that and I sleep in it. And then when I'm around other folks, I'll show it off. You've got to realize that beneath that crusty self is someone who's just needs everything we have. They're just not in touch with it. And I also believe that once you demonstrate for that, it makes it easy for them to soften their inner critic and have that available to deliver to other people. They just have to have a role model.
Mom, were you going to say something?
No, I thought of something, but now it's left me, so I'll come back to it.
Well, one of the things that I think a lot about that I could do every podcast episode on this, but I won't. I think a lot about how the vast majority of us don't have significant education in how to communicate
True.
And then I think about, for me, it helps to turn everybody into a little baby, into a little inner child to humanize them. So I think about that sweet baby one. And even if I was going to communicate something that I thought was just neutral, that they could really take that and put that on themselves in some way. If they already have a harsh inner critic, I could see, like, as a 2, I'm already figuring out, how do I love on this person? I could see that I need to be extra mindful of the way I communicate with a 1 because of that harsh inner critic.
Right. And I'll add to that, not only communicating on the positive side, but if you have something corrective, it's in our language, we would call it corrective feedback to give a 1. You better be careful. You want to be sure that that idea of their emotional bank account is full, because they're already so hard on themselves that when you give corrective feedback to a 1, it is more devastating than a lot of other numbers. So you have to really go in with that idea of here's what I know about you, and holding to that higher ideal that they have for themselves, that you're engaged with that, and that this is just a stepping stone to that. So holding to that space when you're going to give corrective feedback to a 1 is really important.
Yeah. So for those of you that have never heard of the emotional bank account, I'm pretty sure Stephen Covey has the book about that. And I have an episode in season 1 of the podcast you can go listen to if you want to learn more about that. One of the things that John Gottman teaches is like the 3-to-1 ratio, the 6-to-1 ratio of positive to negative feedback. And one of the things that Mom and I have taught with Leading Consciously is how to give positive feedback. And I won't go into it too much, but because I'm so passionate about people learning how to communicate, if you're going to give positive feedback to a 1, it's not just thank you for the thing. It's maybe how the thing made you feel, where you intend to use it, what you appreciate about it, or honoring their input into it. But it's like, how can you deepen, expand on your gratitude in a way that makes that positive feedback like sticky or something they can really sink their teeth into.
Right. Well, and also I would add just what, like, the perfection of anything that they've done for you, where that perfection is for you. Like, this was really perfect that you thought about me in this way. This was really perfect that you did, using that word is like helpful. It makes it sticky for those ones. This was perfect the way you did this. So, so doing that, making sure that you are building up those ones, because it'll help them with their own inner critic, but also when you have to give supportive, corrective feedback, you've got the basis on which to do that. So,
yeah, that's so fascinating. I mean, this is, again, why we're doing all these episodes. But perfection is not ever something I even notice. It's not something I'm looking for, so it's just things are what they are. And I'm not that judgy of a person, so I'm not judging if things are right or wrong. So just the idea of looking for perfection on behalf of giving feedback to the 1, it's really helpful for me in thinking about, how can I love and honor my 1s in my life?
Yeah.
Interesting. Anything else we want to say about being in relationship with 1s? Here's where I've gone in my mind to the spiritual aspect of things. And it's similar but different to what you said earlier about like the holy idea or the perfection in the universe. I was thinking about the concept of a divine idea, of like, if perfection is divinity, 1s have a divine idea and they're essentially trying to make it manifest into the imperfect human world.
Yes.
And that is something I can fall in love with. You're trying to bring the divine to the messy, egoic human state of things. And that is something that's really admirable.
Yeah.
I feel really good about ones now, which is good because I wasn't sure. I also think I'd be curious. So, Dad, Dana, you're a 9, I'm a 2, so we both share that one wing, and I think we both relate to having a very harsh inner critic. I'm curious if the idea of somebody giving you positive feedback and saying that it was perfect, do you think that would resonate any more for you than something else?
Well, I'm a 9 at heart, so I wouldn't believe it. I figured they were setting me up. So, I don't know what to say about that. I don't think I've ever done anything perfectly, and but I feel really good if somebody said it was perfect. So what we've been talking about, you described as valuing things as being imperfect. That is the virtue of serenity for the one. That behind this is that the world as it is, it's imperfect as I view it. I mean, when you learn to walk, you're going to fall down a bunch of times. You're just not going to jump to the absolute. And you don't have the time and energy to fix everything. And so that when you come upon something, it's perfect as it is because it's early on into its growth and its development. So that's where a one can find serenity in realizing that things are perfect and you can make them better, and distinguishing between what is theirs to do and what is not theirs to do, where they can find more time to be in that release point. That 7 is when they realize that they don't have to fix everything. There is time for me to go out of here and explore and be fun. There's time for me to be over here in the 4 and become, more creative. So that's the virtue for them, is serenity, because it frees them up to become more in touch with all the other aspects of themselves.
When you say that's the virtue, are you saying that's a virtue that they already have, or you're saying that's what they're trying to get?
That's the fully redeemed one, where they are really integrated. They are on the fully downside. Their vice is anger. They're frustrated about things not being perfect. On the very high side, the virtue is serenity. They understand that things are the way they are, and they don't have to perfect everything. That they work on the things that are theirs to do and sit back and relax when something's not theirs to work on. And they just accept that in our essence, that our spiritual essence, we're all perfect, and that we're all works in progress. And that'll help them relax and enjoy the high side of their wings in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like to wrap up if you guys are ready to wrap up.
Sure.
I'd like to wrap up, and I just want to, I kind of want to give a blessing to the ones. So I want to honor their commitment to what is right and their dedication to making things better. And I want to wish them lots of fun and outlets for creativity, and just send all those little baby ones lots of "you are already enough" vibes. And so for ones, if you're listening, we honor you. We love you. All you people that love ones, go tell them how perfect they are. And we'll talk soon, everyone. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Living Out Love podcast. If this episode was helpful for you, there are 3 ways that you can share the love. You can send this episode to family, friend, neighbor, leave me a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, or comment and ask questions on YouTube. This season is meant to be interactive. Thanks again for your presence. I appreciate you being here. Talk to you next week, loves.